It's my Nerd World, a Star Wars show, and on this week's episode, more clues to the potential galactic lineage, DNA, between Omega and Rey, clues buried inside of The Bad Batch Season 3. Also, I'll share my thoughts on Dune Part 2. Don't worry, I'll make sure that if you haven't seen Dune and aren't familiar with the story, you won't be spoiled. I'll give you plenty of warning. Plus, its similarities to Star Wars, as George Lucas was famously inspired by Dune, as apparently so were a lot of science fiction writers. And we have your listener feedback this week. Thank you so much for checking out that galaxy far, far away. Now let's go ahead and get to this week's episode.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My Nerd World.
Just let it in.
It is my Nerd World, a Star Wars show. Welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice. Thank you so much for checking out another episode. As always, if you want to email, you can do that. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. And of course, my Nerd World is brought to you by the EMBARK science fiction space opera series. After Earth faces its end, follow pilots Taft Katha and their crew on a journey of survival across the galaxy as they fight for theirs and humanity's future among the stars. Available on Amazon.com. Just search for Jon, Jon Justice, and EMBARK. Ebook, paperback, audiobook, hardcover, Kindle Unlimited. More details later on in the episode. So, I want to talk to you a bit about theories going around, an idea that I have, and I have it laid out here from another outlet that I'll share with you here in just a moment, relating to the potential that Omega and Rey could share some DNA. Also, I want to share my thoughts on Dune Part 2. So we'll cover the Star Wars heavy content, and then we'll do some listener feedback, and then I'll get into Dune Part 2 and its similarities to Star Wars. That way, for those of you that aren't familiar with the Dune story, if you haven't read the book, or certainly if you haven't seen Dune Part 2, you will not be spoiled.
We are the spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
So from Cinema Blend, I found this piece talking about a clue that was in the teasers that Lucasfilm has shared for The Bad Batch. And I'll share with you my thoughts because I was already going down this road. I really enjoyed the latest episode of The Bad Batch. This was more of your adventure of the week after those 3 opening episodes of this season. It still ties into the major storyline, but consisting of Omega and Crosshair after having escaped from the Empire, now trying to find their way back to Hunter and Rex. And of course, by the end of the episode, for those that have watched it, spoiler alert, they do. And it was a touching moment. It really is a fantastic show and has me continually wondering where this is all going to be going, not just within the details of the episode, but where do our characters end up going as we move forward in the timeline. So, again, I have my specific thoughts on this particular theory, but I wanted to share with you what Cinema Blend wrote. Lucasfilm, as I mentioned, has shared a teaser of what's to come following the Bad Batch premiere of those 3 episodes, recycling some clips from the 3 episodes premiere, while also showcasing some brand new ones. The standout clip features Omega speaking to someone who's not seen, having now changed out of her gray Mount Tantus outfit and telling them that I need to know what I am. Now, this is extremely significant, given how the Bad Batch Season 3 premiere set up Omega and her blood to be nothing short of vital to Emperor Palpatine's Project Necromancer, a mysterious mutant clone created by the Kaminoans, Omega longed to get away from Kamino and explore the galaxy. She was rescued from the Empire by, of course, Clone Force 99 and soon became the heart of the team. The Empire still view Omega as valuable, though, and all signs indicate her story could well end in tragedy. I certainly hope that's not the case. Omega may already be the first successful Force-sensitive clone. Now, we talked about this on last week's episode. I'm a little reluctant to go down that road, and I'll explain why further here in just a moment. But the article goes on to say, the emphasis Star Wars has put on Omega and her connection to Project Necromancer proves that she may very well be the first successful Force-sensitive clone in Star Wars history. The success of Force-sensitive cloning on a slightly larger scale was first seen in The Mandalorian Season 3 finale when Moff Gideon revealed that he had started creating a Force-sensitive army of himself through cloning. The Bad Batch, however, is showing its origin leading up to Palpatine's resurrection, and its premiere has already teased that Omega is clearly a part of it. Now, this line of dialogue has shared in the teaser further, Star Wars has shared in the teaser further emphasizes the massive twist that could be coming. Omega is clearly determined to figure out why she was in danger at Mount Tantus and why Nala Se was so devoted to never allowing Omega's blood to be tested. Now, while the audience knows it's because Omega's blood presumably retains a high enough M count to prevent degradation of the specimen, Omega has not learned this, and a personal quest to find out more about herself could lead to an ever bigger reveal. Now, to that higher M count preventing the degradation of Palpatine's blood, again, I still don't necessarily see that is indicative of her having Force abilities. I do sort of question this particular theory a little bit because, in my view, we haven't really seen the Force abilities fully yet indicated with Omega, and just because her blood doesn't show degradation doesn't necessarily mean she has the Force. But that line, I need to know who I am, still sticks out. Nala Se, knowing Omega's blood would be an ideal sample, seems to already prove that Omega is Force-sensitive, according to the article. I disagree a little bit. And it also makes it likely that Omega was purposely created as a Force-sensitive cloning experiment. This would make her the first ever Force-sensitive clone, and it also would explain what her true genetic mutation is, since Emery Carr, also being a female clone of Jango Fett, disproves the idea that this is what made her unique. The Bad Batch, then, is preparing to carry through with a clone twist that will no doubt change the galaxy forever. Now, again, I'm still a little reluctant to buy into this, especially given some of the more recent Star Wars content in Ahsoka, and while these timelines are disconnected from one another and there's no direct connections, we do still have a story currently of Force sensitives in Ahsoka with Sabine tapping into her Force ability. Also, it's a little too derivative of what we've seen going through with Grogu as well, which is why I'm a little reluctant to put Omega in the category of being Force sensitive. I think there might be something else at play. Okay. Attempting to draw a through line to the sequel trilogy, I did find it very intriguing that Omega, in that first episode of Season 3, we showed the different ways and the time jump that took place through various means. The water filling up her sink in her room. More specifically, those scratched hash marks on the wall, which was just like what Rey did in The Force Awakens. And also, Rey showed her love of creatures in The Rise of Skywalker, healing the serpent on Pisana, and then, of course, going, and I'm not calling Kylo Ren a creature, but she did go and heal him as well. But more specifically, her love of creatures in The Rise of Skywalker. Considering many people are theorizing that the storyline in The Mandalorian with Moff Gideon, knowing potentially of what Palpatine was doing, Moff Gideon was simply attempting to the Force cloning process on his own using Grogu, meaning you had two separate cloning things taking place. You have the issue going on with Palpatine and his desire to cheat death, create a clone of himself. So you kind of have that going on deep in the background in The Mandalorian. And there's been a lot of talk that what Moff Gideon was working on with Grogu was also attached maybe to Project Necromancer, and I know that was mentioned in The Mandalorian. I'm of the opinion, and others are of the opinion, that Moff Gideon was off doing his own thing. So his cloning desire and his attempts to use Grogu for that were completely separate from what Palpatine was doing. And while Palpatine successfully did go and create a clone of himself, that particular clone being the one that fathered Rey, this could potentially mean if Omega's blood ends up being the key, and they end up getting enough of Omega's blood to bring about that particular clone of Palpatine, this could potentially mean that Rey has some of Omega in her. And that's the part of this that I find interesting. It's a bit of a stretch. I get it. However, I just do find that similarity with her doing the hash marks as just being very, very subtle to maybe indicate that while Rey got her Force abilities from the Emperor, and more specifically her father, who was a clone of the Emperor, perhaps deep down there's some genetic connections to Omega, and that perhaps through Season 3 of The Bad Batch, we may find out more about that. As always, love to know what you think. Drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. All right, before we get to talk about Dune and Similarities, for those that haven't seen it, let's go ahead and do some listener feedback, and then I'll get into the spoilers relating to Dune.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
First off, we hear from Ray2017, who writes this: "It is absolutely unreal that an animated show can be this compelling, and we're only a handful of episodes in. It almost doesn't make sense. It shouldn't work, and yet it does, and it's great. Not unusual, though, for animated Star Wars shows to start getting better after their first two seasons. They tend to really kick it into high gear by the time they get to the third season, so it's almost no surprise, and yet it is. Who knew The Bad Batch would begin hopping into the driver's seat to stir us in the direction it needed to go, and who knew it would be the one to do with the Clone Wars, it would be the one to do what the Clone Wars did for the prequels." And then they wrap up saying, "You didn't hear that from me." It was a little hard to follow there, but I think I understand what you were saying. As always, though, thank you for the message and for listening. I appreciate it. N Black writes this: "The problem is they put the best story elements and story arcs in the animated stuff. They should be saving their best ideas for live action, but instead, live action gets the watered-down treatment. But at least we have Dune 2 coming out." Yeah, I can see what you're saying, but then again, it depends on your point of view, right? I kind of point back to Ahsoka, and I think that with Ahsoka, they did quite a lot with that show. I think if you're looking at, Obi-Wan Kenobi or Book of Boba Fett, we didn't get these types of tie-ins, but we certainly did in The Mandalorian. But everyone's entitled to, their opinion, and I always appreciate you writing in. All right, so that wraps up the Star Wars content for the show, apart from talking about Dune and Star Wars. So if you haven't seen Dune Part 2 yet, then I would invite you to pause the show, go watch it, and then come back. I'll share with you my thoughts on Dune Part 2, and then we'll get into, from Star Wars Newsnet, Grant Davis put together a lengthy editorial. I trimmed it down for the sake of time to the points that I wanted to share of the similarities between Dune and Star Wars.
This is not going to go the way you think.
Now, I've never read the original Dune book. I was really excited when it was announced that they were going to be turning Dune into a movie again, especially with Denis Villeneuve being the one to direct it. I'm a big Denis Villeneuve fan. Blade Runner 2049 I thought was spectacular. Arrival is great. Sicario is also just a fantastic film as well. When the movie first came out, obviously being a fan of space opera, I wasn't sure exactly what to expect, and I'll be honest. The first time I saw Dune, while I really, really enjoyed it, I had a little bit of difficulty with it just because it is a bit of a slower burn. I know people will argue that point, but when you, let's just say, compare it to a typical Star Wars movie, as, in the sequel trilogy specifically, I probably, in terms of pacing, would move it closer to something like The Last Jedi than certainly I would The Rise of Skywalker. And being close to 3 hours long, the first Dune, it is a long movie. Now, that being said, I've really come to love that movie. After getting into the mythology more, spending more time with the movie itself, understanding a bit of the, as I mentioned, the mythology, I really have become to love that movie. And even upon a rewatch before going and seeing Dune Part 2, I found myself as enthralled with it, more enthralled with it on repeat viewings than I was that first time I saw it in theaters. So it was with great anticipation that I went to the theater last night with my sons to go see Dune Part 2. It had been receiving rave reviews online, and I disagree with the reviews to a certain extent. It is a fantastic movie. It is combined together, one of the most amazing science fiction epics that I have ever seen, because it really is an epic. It is science fiction. It is a space opera. There is mythology attached to it. It does get a little weird, but I cannot really compare it to anything that I have seen in the science fiction genre on the big screen before, except for something like Blade Runner 2049. The movie Part 2 picks up where Part 1 leaves off. And this really is one whole movie. Christian Harloff on the Big Thing podcast has made this comment, and I will echo what he said. And that is, it's a 6-hour film. It's not really two movies. It is a Part 1 and 2 just for the sake of its release. But really, when you watch it, this is a grand 6-hour movie. Dune Part 2 makes Part 1 feel like it really is just a prequel, a setup to what Dune Part 2 brings to the screen in terms of the grandeur, the scope, the action sequences, the dialogue, the mythology. It takes it all just up a notch. And I imagine the book does something similar. I'll be speaking specifically in my thoughts about Dune Part 2 to the movie, not the book, obviously, because I haven't read it. When we dive into the similarities between Star Wars and Dune, that's when it takes a bit of a turn, because the author, Grant Davis, of this editorial references the books as the books as well. The beginning part of Dune Part 2 is paced similarly to the slower portions of Dune Part 1. It starts off a little bit slower. I've heard some comments of people saying that, it's clear that Dune Part 2 is a much different movie than Dune Part 1. It really isn't. It's just that point in the storyline of Dune Part 1, after Paul Atreides ends up defeating Jamis of the Fremen, which is where Dune Part 1 leaves off and where Dune Part 2 picks up. The pacing is very similar just because of where we are within the story. You begin to see a little bit more of the scope, the Emperor coming into play, his daughter as well, what the Harkonnen are doing on Arrakis, and this movie just begins to build and build. And the political intrigue begins to widen. The mythology begins to widen in scope. The character studies begin to grow. The characters themselves begin to grow. You go through a bit of a training over, unsure exactly how long in the film we're looking at, probably 6 months based off of what's happening with one of the characters. And I don't want to get full into spoilers. I'm kind of dancing on a few things because I was completely unaware, again, of where the story in Dune was going. I was shocked at some of the twists the story took. And knowing now some of the differences that I've heard in reviews between the novel and the movie, I like at least what I'm hearing, and I agree with those who think that the changes that Denis Villeneuve and Jon Spaihts, the other writer on the film, made were appropriate for the big screen. The turn of Paul Atreides towards the end, and in the storytelling in and of itself, the risks that the Dune story, whether it's book or movie, actually take in telling the story. I mean, there is a heart-breaking facet to this story that I just simply did not expect. The action sequences are just stunning. I mean, the film itself, I mean, I was listening to another show talk about this, and I was thinking the same thing, but I like to make sure that I reference those other places. I was listening to the Big Thing podcast and Amanda Dobbins and Sean Fennessy, and I was already thinking down these lines. But you watch a film like Dune, and being a science fiction fan, I kind of sit back and go, why can't all the science fiction movies look like this? Like, the one movie that I would probably go and compare it to would be The Martian, because The Martian is just a gorgeous, gorgeous film. And it's interesting because the Mars scenes in The Martian are the same. It's the same physical location of Wadi Rum that they used in Dune that was also used in The Rise of Skywalker. As a matter of fact, they were filming Dune Part 1 at the same time they were filming The Rise of Skywalker in that same desert region of Wadi Rum. But you watch a film like Dune and you kind of just sit back and scratch your head going, why can't all the films look as good as this when they have similar budgets? I mean, you compare it to a CG spectacle like the latest Aquaman film or the first Aquaman film, and you kind of just go, what in the world are you guys doing with Aquaman, for crying out loud? The movie reminded me quite a bit of, in terms of length, like Avatar, but very, very different. In terms of the scope and the mythology and the storytelling, like Avatar is certainly much more of your popcorn genre type of film, even though it is very grandiose in scope and it looks incredibly real. Dune slows its pacing down and it takes its time, almost like it's a bizarro cross between Avatar and, say, Lawrence of Arabia. The battle sequences at the end of the film are just absolutely stunning. I simply can't wait to go to the theater to see it again. My only complaints that I have of the movie is, one, unfortunately, it's 3 hours long. So, you know, when you when you use time as a commodity and a film is 3 hours long, that's tough to go and see multiple times. The only other complaint I would have for the film is that it does some weird editing choices where you're going on what you think are particular journeys, and then suddenly the movie shifts gears and takes you to another place with these characters, and it takes you just a moment to kind of realize, okay, that adventure that we thought we were going to be going on, we're really not. And really what we're in the middle of is a training montage without the fast-paced music and the jump cuts. That's the only complaint that I really have about the film, where there was one or two particular moments where I was a little lost as to where we were, and it took me kind of a minute to get my bearings again. It's a movie, though, that sticks with you. I had a very similar experience to watching Dune Part 2 as I did Part 1, just because when your expectations are so high, it's hard for it to ever meet those expectations. And The Force Awakens was the same way. And yet, as I'm processing the film, as I am almost worn out from going on this adventure for 3 hours sitting in a movie theater, I find myself 24 hours later still thinking about this and pondering what I saw and some of the brave choices that the film made. There's nothing in the movie that doesn't work in terms of its concepts, its storyline, and its dialogue, and certainly in terms of its effects. Again, any complaint that I had is solely in the editing. I'm curious to see if Denis Villeneuve will actually move forward and do a third story or not. So that remains to be seen. So we'll see how that shakes out. I'll also mention that while there's certainly violence in the film, can't really get away from that, there are moments in the movie where there could have been... The director could have taken a certain approach to certain scenes, and he didn't, and I was very grateful of that. He kept the more explicit content either completely off the screen or in some intimate moments reserved it for close-ups that wasn't anything close to being gratuitous whatsoever. Meaning, I'm watching with my 17-year-old, and at no point was I uncomfortable as a father sitting in a theater watching this. So a hat tip to Denis Villeneuve for doing that with scenes that certainly could have played much differently had they been at the hands of another director who really wanted to push the images on screen and simply chose not to. It's just fantastic. There's a part of me that wants Denis Villeneuve to do a Star Wars movie, and then there's a part of me that says, no, Denis Villeneuve needs to do whatever he wants to do, and maybe others can be inspired by what Denis Villeneuve did with Star Wars. That being said, much has been made that George Lucas and others were inspired by Dune. So let's get into some of the similarities between Star Wars and Dune. As I'm reading here from this Grant Davis editorial, again edited for the podcast, the most obvious place to start is and there's a lot of spoilers in here relating to the Dune story that I did not get into in my brief thoughts about the movie. So if you don't want to be spoiled at all, then now's the time to bid adieu to the show. Come back and listen after you've gone and watched the movie. The most obvious place to start is the concept of the desert planet. While Dune didn't invent the concept, it did popularize it in the form of Arrakis. There are a host of other similarities that match up. Aren't necessarily huge parts of Star Wars, as they are to the Duneverse, as they write. Aaliyah Atreides trains against, and that would be Paul Atreides' sister. In the book, trains against a target dummy with her blades, while Luke trains against a remote with a lightsaber. Electric-powered binoculars are utilized by Paul as he scouts out Fremen, the native population of Arrakis, and Luke memorably uses them to search for his droids and later to spot Tusken Raiders. Various iterations of Imperium rule the Duneverse over time, but the Empire is one of several governments throughout galactic history. The Spacing Guild has a monopoly on shipping and transportation, while the Trade Federation attempts to assert its growth by controlling shipping, which, aside from its importance to the plot of The Phantom Menace, doesn't really prove to be that important in the larger story otherwise. The Duneverse has super sensors, while Star Wars has repulsors, which allow both of their users to float above the ground and use faster-than-light travel. And I'll tell you, there were some breathtaking moments where somebody just lifting off the ground and going to another location. I know you're going to be like, how is that special? To watch it in the film was eye-dropping. Was eye-opening, jaw-dropping. Spice mines, like the ones in the Duneverse, are a feature of the galaxy, specifically when it comes to Kessel, but as far as the movies are concerned, it's only relevant to the spin-off Solo movie and not any of the main films. Likewise, the creatures are similar. Sandworms of the Duneverse, such as the Exogorth, a.k.a. the Space Slug in The Empire Strikes Back, the Sarlacc in Return of the Jedi, or the Krayt Dragon in The Mandalorian. But none of these creatures are crucial to the ecosystem of Arrakis and the long-form storytelling of the saga, instead of merely serving as standard monsters for our heroes to fight. You know, the one thing that I thought was interesting as I walked out from Dune Part 2 was just thinking about the similarities with the original Star Wars movie. And I'm kind of eager to go back and watch A New Hope for the umpteenth gazillion time after watching the Dune movies, just because, to me, the most A New Hope is probably the closest in terms of similarity with the original Dune. George was the first one to go and put it to screen, where it took, David Lynch to put the Dune story, be the first one to put the Dune story to the silver screen in a movie that I still have not seen beginning to end. I've tried to watch that movie several times, and maybe now that I know the complete story of Dune, I might be able to follow along with it. I never really enjoyed it, but I'm eager to go back and watch A New Hope now, having seen the entirety of the Dune story, and sort of do, with that in the back of my mind, if that makes sense. Many of these influences can be dismissed to a degree as common tropes of science fiction and space fantasy alike, but not all comparisons to Dune and Star Wars are surface level. There are plenty of similarities within the greater narratives of both stories. The Bene Gesserit in Dune are the closest thing that the Duneverse have to the Jedi Order, although their secretive and manipulative nature also sort of hearken to the Sith to a degree. One of the key ideas shared between Dune and Star Wars is the importance of prophecy and precognition. Thanks to the abilities taught to him by the Bene Gesserit, Paul is able to see things before they happen, with several possible futures presented to him. While Star Wars is well known for the famous "I am your father" reveal, with it being revealed that Luke Skywalker is the son of Darth Vader, Dune actually utilized the concept when it a vision of the past experienced by Paul Atreides, that the villainous Baron Harkonnen is the illegitimate father of Lady Jessica, his mother. Paul's descendants secretly carry both bloodlines forward, which itself is somewhat reflective to Star Wars as two rival bloodlines spiritually merging into a single one. Rey is biologically the grandfather of Emperor Palpatine, who she repudiates, but is resurrected by her half of a dyad with the last Skywalker. Apologies here. First time reading through this, and the writing's a little wonky. Who dies to save her. She becomes the last Skywalker after his death, accepting that the Skywalker family connected through the Force, her adoptive family, while Luke and Rey are both told of their villainous ancestors. Paul learns of the truth through his emerging abilities. Paul Atreides has character aspects both reflected in Anakin Skywalker and his son Luke. While Paul has more in common with Luke, he's entrusted with a prophecy of sorts like Anakin. Whereas Anakin is the chosen one who will bring balance to the Force, Paul is the prophesied Kwisatz Haderach, who the people of Arrakis believe will provide the shortening of the way that will bring his followers to prosperity on the Golden Path. The twist, however, is that Paul ultimately ends up failing through his success in a series. Going down this path results in the power Paul seeks, but leaves countless people dead and the world's left in ruin, which eventually results in Paul going into exile and becoming a preacher to tell others to move away from the path that he'd once set for them. Paul also has a sister named Aliyah, who, like him, has a connection to the powers granted by the Bene Gesserit, much in the same way that Leia Organa is Luke's twin and can use the Force, and the two are crucial in overthrowing those who plotted against her family, as the twins are keeping the balance of the Force maintained. Aliyah falls in love with Duncan Idaho, much like Leia falls in love with Han Solo. The big difference, it is worth noting, however, that for the various similarities that these two works have, they offer diametrically opposed concepts narratively. Dune is a fundamental deconstruction of the entire Chosen One concept and emphasizes how badly things will go if a number of people started to blindly follow a Messiah-like figure and waging wars in his name. Star Wars, in the meantime, uses that as a key concept of its narrative, but less as a political or military leader, and more as someone who will restore balance to the Force itself. And though that also causes tragedy, it's due to the actions of the protagonist and the villain manipulating him and everyone else, rather than a hero who leads people into zealotry. and the focus becomes less focused on a prophecy and more on family dynasty spanning over 60 years of stories. Unsurprisingly, the grand conflict of the first book itself uses a structure that Star Wars would follow. A group of ragtag rebels, the Fremen, and the Alliance to Restore the Republic from an unoccupied planet, Arrakis, Tatooine, rise up against a group of dangerous invaders, the Imperium's Sardaukar, and the Imperial Stormtroopers, who recently betrayed a heroic group of characters, the Jedi Order and House Atreides, and left their forces in shambles, with the heroes allying themselves with the rebels. I almost wish... I'm glad I didn't read the books before I saw the Dune films, just because it's been fun to have this story exposed to me through seeing the movies and having read the books, and then having gone and watched the film to go, well, these things don't match up. That being said, I kind of wish that I had known more of the close similarities, especially the comparisons between the Jedi and the Bene Gesserit, between Star Wars and Dune, before seeing Dune and thinking about it in those terms and knowing this is where the story would end up unfolding. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast again this week. If this is your first time listening to the podcast and you enjoy reading science fiction, I hope you'll take a moment and check out my science fiction space opera series, EMBARK. 7 books in all in the series, tells a complete story in all 7 books. The first 3 stories in the opening trilogy do tell a complete story, with a spin-off story in book 4 that leads into a second trilogy of 5, 6, and 7. Treat yourself, a friend, or a family member with science fiction. It's written for adults, but it's great for ages 11 plus. I'm all talked out today. Can you tell? I've done my full show plus my Depeche Mode podcast and now my Star Wars podcast. I'm a bit spent. Book 1's description is as follows. Taftgardia has found something, and humanity won't survive without it. With interstellar travel possible, ship mechanic Taftgardia prepared to one day travel the galaxy. But when an industrial accident inside a D-Corp civilian and military spacecraft factory sets off an apocalyptic chain of events, exploring the stars becomes a matter of survival. As the global evacuation begins, the ruthless Sin Argum of D-Corp threatens to destroy every vessel not loyal to his regime. Meanwhile, fellow pilot Kate Amaro suddenly receives a cryptic message from her father, an aerospace engineer who died 1 year earlier. When Taft and Katha discover what may be the key to saving Earth's evacuees, they become unwittingly tied to the catastrophe and must solve the mystery of her father's past before it's too late. Treat yourself, a friend, or a family member to EMBARK. Available on Kindle Unlimited, ebook, hardcover, paperback, and audiobook. If you like your science fiction space opera to be epic, filled with some romance and some action and really cool tech, then EMBARK is perfect for you. Available now on Amazon.com or mynerdworld.net. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast again this week. I hope wherever you are, you're happy, you're healthy, you're safe. God bless, and I'll talk to you again next week. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.